All right, welcome to the Communication Research Center's April Colloquium, our final event of this semester. My name is Michelle Amazine. I'm Director of the CRC and Associate Dean of Research here at COM. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Please silence your phones, your laptops, anything that beeps. We are recording. If you are a student who's here wishing to get credit for SONA, please be sure that you have checked in at the back with our staff. And I'd like to give a shout out to Amanda King, our Lab and Research Manager, as well as Alyssa Hance and Sean Mao for all their help in putting together this colloquium series. So our colloquium speaker today is Professor Danehy, who is an Associate Professor of the Practice in Media Science. She has over 3 decades of experience conducting communication research, both nationally and internationally, including founding her own communication research consulting firm, Strategic Opinion Research. Prior to launching her firm, she served as Vice President of a national polling organization and Director and Founder of the Research Division at an International Public Relations Agency. As we will see today, her research skills have been used in various industries, including healthcare, tech startups, education, and Fortune 500 companies. Using various qualitative and quantitative tools, Professor Danehy helps organizations get inside the heads of their target audiences, learning about their attitudes, their perceptions, pain points, and motivations, leading to the development of effective marketing, public relations, and advertising campaigns. Professor Danehy excels at managing large, multi-layered research projects, using research to develop, implement, and evaluate strategic communication messages. Today, Professor Danehy will be sharing some of her research experiences in her talk, Applied Communication Research for Integrated Strategic Communication, for Integrated Strategic Campaigns, a Practical Perspective. Please join me in welcoming Professor Danehy.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's not often that I get to talk about my career as an applied communication researcher to a group. So what is the difference? We have academic researchers, and then you hear the term applied researchers. What is the difference? There's many similarities, but there's also differences. Some of the similarities are that we use the same tools. We use surveys, we use focus groups, we use big data, use in-depth interviews, online communities, a lot of the same tools. We also maintain quality control because conducting bad research leads to bad results and bad campaigns. So we're also conducting methodologically sound research. And we do presentations. We do presentations on our results. Now, how are we different? Oftentimes we work under different timelines. Oftentimes, when you're doing business research, we're working with shorter timelines because they need decisions right away. When I was doing political polling, I did political polling for a news organization, and they would call us at 2 in the afternoon and say, we need to get in the field, something's breaking, we need the results by tomorrow. And we would do that. We would collect the data, and I used to be able to stay up all night to do that. Can't do that anymore, but I used to. And that's a really unusual circumstance, but oftentimes if things need to be done quickly. It's also proprietary, meaning that the research that we conduct is client owned. I don't own the research. And in fact, anytime I release research, I have to get permission in order to do so. Government research is public because it's government, and I do a lot of work with government research. So I'm sharing some work that I've done on a campaign that's government related that I can share. And also a difference is that we use it for strategy. Research is used to develop strategic campaigns. So any of you who are going into advertising or public relations, you most likely will end up crossing paths with a researcher. And our audience is not researchers. So one thing that we have to do when we present data is to present it in a very user-friendly way, because they want to do the research, they want to use the research for an end goal of developing effective communication campaigns. So we provide substantive, we're all about telling a data-driven story. So we show the data. By showing the data, we get buy-in by our clients. So it's not just me saying, hey, I think you should do this. I can show data that says your target audience, this is what your target audience thinks, and this is how they behave, and this is what we recommend for a strategy. Not from a personal opinion, but from data. So we always use our data to when we present results. So why is this a great field? One of the things feel like I've been really fortunate to have a very great career. Now there's lots of uses for what I do. I've been in the field of working a lot in public health, with government, with help with healthcare. So I've been able to affect change, to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that, when you can do work that's meaningful, it means a lot, and work that you find joy in. I'm constantly learning about different people in different industries, and I've had the opportunity to talk to people that I probably never would have talked to and learn from them. So it's given me a much broader perspective on the world, and to understand where people are coming from, and that aids in communication as well. And there's lots of opportunities in this field. This field is growing. From when I started, research was a luxury. Now it's a necessity. Campaigns are being charged with developing effective campaigns. We have so many more ways to reach populations, so many more ways to do micro-targeting, that it's really important that the research is done, that we understand our audience. So how is applied communication research used? Research is used to develop a strategy, told you that. We identify our target audience. Who are we trying to reach? Sometimes we know who we're trying to reach, sometimes we don't, and sometimes the research helps identify different messages for different audiences. And I'll show you a little bit about that. We learn about motivation, attitudes, and behaviors. How does that influence people, and how can we use that information to persuade and to influence? We work with advertising and public relation firms and marketing to create an integrated strategy. And we work to use that to influence behavior, attitudes, and beliefs. So research is really the strategic roadmap that is used in any kind of communication campaign. It's used at the beginning to help develop the message, to understand your target audience, how they think, how they feel. It's used as the implementation, about how do we use research to implement our strategy. And then after we've implemented it and checked it, then we want to evaluate it. How successful was this campaign? Did this campaign do what we intended to do? Sometimes yes, usually yes, but sometimes it's no. And in that case, we need to reflect and think, what do we need to do differently? And also, how does that research build upon other research? So target audiences, it's really important because understanding people representing different demographics and psychographics allows for more personalized messaging and better targeting. Oftentimes, we think that we might know. We think that if everybody said this, then every audience must feel that way. Absolutely not. We do different messages, different messaging campaigns for different audiences, sometimes within the same campaign. So I've been fortunate because I've done a lot of work with government contracts that I've been able to do research with really diverse populations, including IV drug users and their partners. And that research that I did was really, it was doing research. They were finding out that people were dying of overdoses, and they were like, well, can we prevent this somehow? So they said, let's see what we can do. How can we create prevention material, what to do when somebody's overdosing, that will be helpful? So we interviewed the partners of IV drug users and found out what would be helpful to them. And we learned about their experiences, about it was criminal before. And so if you were an IV drug user and you were with somebody who was overdosing, sometimes they left them. They tried, or they just figured things out. Oh, we'll do this strategy or that strategy. Things did not work. And then they got scared and ran away, and they didn't know what to do. And so because of the research, we ended up developing these cards that go in people's wallets so that people can keep them. So it keeps people safe. And then, and as a result of the research, we started seeing a lot of policy changes around decriminalization of people who are overdosing and leading to drug treatment instead of sending them to jail. So I've done work with low-income populations, which has been really fascinating because I did a lot of work on health insurance, trying to get people. The federal government, before there was the Affordable Care Act, said, how can we get people to have insurance? We want you to do some research to find out why low-income people don't have health insurance. I was like, well, because they can't afford it. But I was like, really? What am I going to figure out? But there was actually way more to that. It was a way more complex process than just not being able to afford it. And what was it that we could do? So I've done work with people with severe mental illness, and that was probably one of the most rewarding campaigns I ever worked on. The Department of Mental Health contacted me. They said, I heard you work in this space. We have a problem. Our clients are dying 20 years earlier than the rest of the population, and that's controlling for suicide. And we have no idea why. We think it's because of medication that they're on, and unhealthy lifestyles. So I said, go on, talk to them. So I talked to them. Did focus groups. I did 15 focus groups across the state with people who had severe mental illness, and they clapped for me. Nobody ever claps for me. At the end of it, I was like, oh. At the end of the focus group, they were all clapping. And they said, nobody has ever asked us what we think. And so nobody had ever, so what they were doing, thinking what's best for them, was really maybe not best for them. What we discovered was that this campaign that we thought was going to be about healthy lifestyles, cooking, and how to take care of yourself, became more a campaign to doctors, to healthcare providers. Because what we found out was that they were saying to us was that we go to the emergency room with a broken ankle, and nobody cares about a broken ankle. They just see us they see our records and see us as having severe mental illness, and then that's all they care about. Nobody really believes me when I tell them what's going on. So they had a really hard time developing trust. So what happened? They didn't go seek healthcare. So that was a big problem. The other problem was that their healthcare providers would leave, and there'd be no follow-up. So it was really hard for them to build relationships. The Department of Mental Health ended up changing that and doing a campaign to educate healthcare providers. I'm going way off tangent. This is what I do in class. I'm sorry. I've done a lot of work with adolescents around substance use prevention, safer sex, a lot of issues there. I've done work with physicians, with community leaders, so a lot of different target audiences. And one of the things I really love about that is I'm always learning. So I always learn, and some assumptions that people have, you learn that those assumptions oftentimes are false. So industries, we have diverse clients have diverse goals. But the common thing is we're using consistent research tools. And so we can work in public health and government, encouraging pro-social behavior, around raising awareness, trying to get people to engage in healthy things that sometimes they don't want to engage in because it's fun to do things that maybe aren't good for us. And so that's a real challenge, is trying to really get inside people's heads to find out what's going to motivate you to do something that is healthy, but might be hard for you to do. Corporate goal, I work a lot with organizations that want to improve their public image, and working as how do they position themselves, because they know that if they have a strong reputation, that's going to be good for their business. And so we work in trying to understand consumers' perceptions. I've worked with hospitals. Hospital comes to me. Our market share has been eroding over the last 10 years. We have no idea why. We're a small community hospital. We bought all this new fancy equipment so we can compete with that big, huge hospital that we keep losing patients to. We did research, and guess what? It was like, oh, you got to stop buying the equipment because it's not big, fancy equipment. You're never going to have the image of being as good as this university hospital. You're a small community hospital. So let's look at what you do well. And what we found was that people who went there, what they liked was that it was comfortable, it was a caring environment, it was in a easy to get parking, really nursing staff was really friendly and kind. And so that's what they focused on. They focused on making their hospital really cozy, comfy, still providing good quality care. And so if you broke your ankle, you'd go to them versus, or you broke your leg, going to them rather than traveling 50 miles to the university hospital. Working with public affairs and nonprofits, working on referendum campaigns around getting, winning at the ballot box. I've done a lot of that work, and healthcare, working with health plans, helping them to communicate complex ideas to the population. So this just represents a variety of the clients that I've worked for. I started my career doing political polling. That politics is a great field to start in. It's for the young because you get burnt out very quickly. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And that's how I built a lot of my government clients and my government clients. I've worked for a whole variety of organizations. I've partnered with advertising and public relations firms. I've worked with foundations. I worked with government organizations, hospitals, worked with casinos, when the casino wanted to site a new location. And so a wide variety of work, again, using the same tools. So these are my tools in my toolbox: focus groups, online communities, in-depth interviews, surveys, data analytics. And that's why it's really important. I'm going to give a plug for the curriculum here, because this is why research is such an important part of our curriculum. Is it research is that whether you're going to be consumers of research or whether you're going to be doing research, understanding research and the role that research plays and being able to differentiate what is good research versus bad research is a skill that will help in your career tremendously. I have been in meetings with people who are very, at certain levels, and they ask a question, and I'm like, you don't know that? So you will, by having this education and research, you will be better prepared. And you'll have great career success. So how do we work with clients? This is a little bit different than in academia. We take the research questions, turn them into measurable constructs. Yes. Like academics. We design research based on the client's goals and objectives. We always tell our clients to do both qualitative and quantitative research. However, timelines and budgets sometimes does not allow that. So we need to really know which tools are the best tools to use to help our client to be successful. And we guide them, and we communicate through the process. Everything gets approved by our clients, so that we are not just doing what we think. And then we conduct the research, we deliver the results, we visualize our data, we call it data-driven story, and we provide recommendations. So we provide strategic recommendations, like what should you do with this? And then the creative people implement those strategies. And we integrate it, consistent messaging with that falls across public relations, advertising, and marketing. So that consistent messaging resonates through multi-channel communication strategies. So now I'm going to give you an example. Keep track of my time. I'm going to give you an example of a campaign that I worked on. This was probably my longest running client, was the Highway Safety Division. I started working for them, and then a long time ago, I won't tell you when, but a long time ago. How many of you have ever heard of Click It or Ticket? So a lot of you have heard of Click It or Ticket. Okay, so Click It or Ticket was a campaign that came around in the early 2000s. And they said, you know what, it was a national campaign, and we were funded through NHTSA, Massachusetts was. And they said, we want to do a campaign to increase safety belt usage. Massachusetts was one of the lowest. We were one of the lowest in this country for seatbelt usage. So we said, okay, we will do the research. So we did pre and post design, meaning we did a pre-survey to understand where people were at, what they knew about the law, what they thought about the law, what their experience was, their attitudes and their beliefs. And then we did the findings. Then there was a big PR and advertising effort, and then quarterly mobilization. But I'll get into more of that. So this is our case study. The campaign was designed to increase seatbelt usage. And our research question was, how can we get people to wear their seatbelts? What is it that works? So we did focus groups and we did surveys to find out what it was, why people weren't wearing their seatbelts. And we did this focus groups by targeted groups. We did it with, we broke it down because our research showed that there were different populations that were more likely and less likely to use their seatbelts. So we did some focus groups first. What did we measure? We measured the driver's perceptions. What did they think about wearing their seatbelts? We wanted to find out their knowledge about it and their behavior. I should have put behavior in there. That was a very important question, finding out how many of them wore their seatbelts and how often they did that. And this campaign continued through 2019. It started in the early 2000s, and it continues today with some modifications. So I'm going to kind of go through about the different phases of this campaign and how research was used in conjunction, integrated with advertising and public relations and marketing. So our pre and post survey design. So the campaign was designed, they said, we're going to do 4 mobilizations throughout the year. And what a mobilization meant was that they were prepared to do public relations strategy. So they did a media campaign, they did events, they did coalition buildings with different organizations. They did an advertising campaign that included outdoor advertising. It included television advertising. And this was early 2000s, so there was no digital at the time. And then they did backbone. So they did that. So they wanted to end enforcement. That was the other piece, is that they were going to do heavy enforcement around giving people tickets who aren't wearing their seatbelts. So our first survey, we said, okay, we're going to our pre-survey. We did the same questions in the pre-survey as the post-survey, so we could see changes in attitudes and behaviors and perceptions and knowledge. So our first survey we did was we did a sample of 1,000 people over the age of 18 was what qualified. You had to be a driver over the age of 18. We did the collection. Originally, our data collection was by phone. At the time, that was the best method to do data collection. We moved to online fairly early, but one of the main reasons that we moved to online was that people are more likely to answer honestly to sensitive topics when it's anonymous. So that was an added benefit of doing that. Our surveys, our self-reported seatbelt behavior is always a little bit higher than observed behavior. We understand that it's social desirability, but we understand that that's what it is. So our questionnaire design, we did a 15-minute survey. And in that survey, we looked at behavior using 5-point Likert scales, measuring frequency, like how often do you wear your seatbelt? And we worded the question in a way that it was okay for people to say that they never wear their seatbelt. I think it was all the time, most of the time, some of the time, hardly ever, never, on that 5-point scale. And then we looked at Likert scales measuring their agreement to a series of statements around their attitudes around seatbelt usage, around did they think that it matters? Does seatbelts make a difference? And then what kind of questions would get them to motivate? What things would motivate them to buckle up? And also, what are their perceptions around enforcement of seatbelts? So their knowledge, we asked them questions like, do you know that Massachusetts has a seatbelt law? Do you think that people who aren't wearing seatbelts are going to get a ticket? How likely do you think that's going to be? We asked how likely it is. And we found some really interesting questions. And then we measured awareness. And we did aided and something called aided and unaided recall. Aided is when we say, have you heard a campaign about seatbelt enforcement? Then we ask, unaided is, can you tell us the name of that campaign? I'll tell you what happened. So our findings. Drivers didn't believe that wearing a seatbelt would lead to getting a ticket. 25% said very or somewhat likely that they get a ticket for not wearing their seatbelt. 71% said very or somewhat unlikely. Only 37% knew that Massachusetts requires wearing a seatbelt, and it was higher. Seatbelt users were more likely to know that there was a seatbelt law. So we were like, okay, if you know it, you're more likely to wear your seatbelt. Only 25% knew of any special effort by police in Massachusetts to increase enforcement of seatbelts. We didn't ask about the unaided recall because this was before the campaign launched. So we had a lot of work to do because people didn't know about, they had no idea that Massachusetts had a law. They didn't think if you're not wearing a seatbelt, they didn't think they were going to get a ticket. Even people who knew about the law didn't think they were going to get a ticket. So the messaging strategy was to raise awareness around the law. The secondary messaging was combating the reasons why. Why is it people weren't wearing their seatbelts? We found out why. It was not because they didn't think seatbelts didn't work. Everybody thought seatbelts worked. So we didn't need to, we knew that our strategy didn't need to be like, oh, if you wear a seatbelt, you're, so many times likely to survive a crash. We didn't have to do that. But what we did have to do, our secondary messaging was around people saying, if I'm just going out, if I'm just close to home, that's when I'm not going to wear my seatbelt. So when you're not likely to wear your seatbelt, even people who said that they always wear the seatbelt, there were times that they didn't. So it was like, driving a short distance, when they were wearing new clothes, sometimes they had all kinds of excuses of why. So that was kind of our sub messaging was around that, because we didn't want to be too, we're not a law enforcement state, so a law and order state. So some of the states like in North Carolina where this campaign originated, their messaging was very much focused on, the law, and seeing their imagery was state police. We didn't want to do that, but we wanted to convey that if you're not wearing a seatbelt, you're going to get a ticket, and Massachusetts has a seatbelt law. So we did our pre and post surveys. We did our pre-survey, and then we did implementation. So they did got a lot of press, got a lot of press for it. They did TV advertising. They did all this collateral materials that they were giving out everywhere, keychains, bumper stickers. They were doing state, press on the major networks, as well as in local communities. It was really a community partnership. So there was a lot of communities that were helping to promote the message. So it was really a statewide effort. What did we find? Well, what we found was we increased the number of people who knew that Massachusetts had a law by a lot. So that was a statistically significant difference. We increased awareness that people knew that they were required to wear seatbelts. We increased the number of people who believed click it or ticket, who believed that if they're not wearing a seatbelt, they're going to get a ticket. So that number went up as well. Lots of media attention through earned and paid channels, and a huge increase in the percent of people who said that they knew about a campaign that was focused on seatbelt enforcement. An unaided recall, this didn't happen at the first. We did these 4 times a year for like 10 years. So this is at the end. We were at like unaided recall was up to like 80%, meaning, are you aware of any seatbelt campaigns? You might have even said just traffic safety. What was the name of it? And they'd say, click it or ticket. So that's huge to have unaided recall that people knew click it or ticket. That was pretty huge. So we were really happy. But there were some problems. We did the surveys over and over, year after year, and guess what? People knew people who were getting tickets for not wearing their seatbelt. So what happens when they don't know people who are, we're telling them, if you don't wear your seatbelt, you're going to get a ticket. And then they didn't know anybody who were like, they're not getting a ticket. So what do you think happens to that? Your message needs to be met with reality. So that was a problem. Seatbelt rates solved. We didn't see any progress going up. And the message just became noise. And we were trying to tell our client, maybe we should try something different here. Maybe we should try something different. Nope, we're going to stick with it. Okay. Yeah, our unaided recall number keeps going up. That's great. But what we're trying to do, which is to change behavior, wasn't happening. So who cares about unaided recall if it doesn't change behavior? So we always have to be mindful as what is our goal. We're very proud. I'm very proud when I say who very put their ticket, if they raise their hand. That's great. Doesn't matter if it doesn't exist behavior. So what we knew from our data was that this is where we said, okay, we really, with the general population, we're not making any inroads here. Let's look at targeted, how can we move targeted audiences? Let's see who we can target in an additional campaign. So we did an additional campaign because we found out, we knew that working class men under the age of 35 without college educations were less likely to wear their seatbelts, even though they knew the law. They knew the law. And they saw the advertisements and promotions, but they just weren't wearing their seatbelts. We weren't budging them. They didn't think they were going to get a ticket. And people who drive pickup trucks were also less likely to wear their seatbelts. So we had to do a deep dig to find out, oh, what's going on here? Why are we not influencing this group of drivers? What's going on? So we did focus groups. We did in-depth interviews. And what it revealed was that they weren't wearing their seatbelts because it just wasn't cool. And that was a big, I was just like, I felt like, and they just felt like it so wasn't cool. It wasn't macho. They said it was really inconvenient. It's annoying. Oh, it takes time to put on your seatbelt. They really didn't have any good reasons, except for it just wasn't cool. So were we gonna like say, oh no, it is cool. Oh yeah. So we created, I did not create the ad. This was an ad that was created in response to the research. I hope this works. You know how we turn on sound? This is just an ad now, so I'll press buttons. Can you hear this at all? No. Okay, let's see.
You're a tough guy.
That's better.
Whether you're planting daisies or building bridges, your mind is tough. Your hands are rough and they're not afraid of dirt. You're part workhorse and part road warrior. And so is your truck, your tools, and your job. So here's some tough love, tough guy. Always use protection. Because no matter how tough you are, your head is not. So use it. Buckle up.
So that was appealing to the macho guy, and they were trying to do it in a funny way. So it's always an evolution. When something's not working, you don't scrap it. You just say, okay, let's figure out, we got a problem. How can we fix it? What can we do differently? And sometimes it's changing your message. Sometimes it's going into target audiences and doing targeted campaigns to that audience. And that's what we did. And so the evolution of this, I did not continue working on it. But the firm that I worked with on this did continue with it. And so how it evolved was that one thing that they found was the one thing that they found in their research, and when we did the deep dive research, was that they cared about people around them. They cared about hurting. Like they're like, well, what happened if you died? They're in a car crash without wearing a seatbelt. Well, what happened? Who would miss you? Who would miss you? They all said their mom. So they all said their mom or other loved ones. But the mom was the most consistent one. So then they said, okay, we're going to do this campaign that they ended up creating material was love your mom, buckle up. And then they did to expand it just around like the focus on love, because we knew that enforcement wasn't really working with them, even though they knew that there was a law. We had to focus on their emotional appeal, which was love clicks, buckle up. And that was the campaign targeted to them. And then what else they did was that they used truck drivers. They turned them into brand ambassadors. So they said, we'll pay you if you put a sign on your truck. And they're like, sure. So became a great effort that they were doing that. And so then it kind of became like, okay, these like super cool guys, have that on their car. And then the idea was to, kind of try to change the behavior by doing more of an emotional appeal. They updated the campaign. They're on social now. They're on Instagram. They're on Twitter or X, whatever we call it. And so the result was that they saw an 8% increase in seatbelt usage, which is pretty huge. So the campaign, it's been gone through several iterations, but it was successful. So I have other things. Oh, I can tell you a little bit more. So another study that I did was it's also around research, it's around cultural sensitivity. It's understanding different cultures and understanding that there's not a one size fits all to messaging. This was a client that I had, the Department of Public Health, and I had worked with them many, many years ago on some materials that were targeted to parents about how to talk to your teenagers about alcohol and other drugs. And it was in a question answer format. And they said, we're seeing data that's showing the Native American community, we're seeing a rise in substance use in the Native American community. We're thinking of creating this material for them. And we had done different populations. We did it in like 10 different languages. And so, but they said, we've never really talked to Native Americans, so we want you to talk to them. So I did focus groups with them. And there's a lot of we actually hired a cultural consultant to make sure that we were running these culturally appropriate. And we did focus groups. So we brought them in and I said, can you look this over, read this booklet, read it over, we'll ask you questions. I'm like, I'm like, nobody's reading it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this whole focus group, asking them what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, nobody's reading. So I'm like, oh, yeah, just make sure you read it. I asked some questions about it. And then it came in and we started talking and they were like basically, this is stupid. Like, this does not appeal to us. They said, doesn't appeal to us. They said, we don't talk like this. We don't do questions and answers. And then I said, well, how do you talk? Like, what do you talk? And they said, well, the way that our culture is that there's elders, and our elders are the ones who talk to people. And they're great, wise, the elders in our community are wise people, and that's who we listen to. And when we have talks, we don't do it like sit down at the kitchen table and say, oh, what are you doing? And how was your day? It's that when we notice that our child's having an issue, we go out into nature with them. And we rely on our stories from our past, and that we take them out and get into nature, and we have poems that help to communicate with them. So I was like, okay, well, we were totally, this is going to be a much bigger issue. And I remember they were like, oh, we don't really have the budget for this. But they said, if we're going to go forward with this, there's no sense in creating materials that are going to sit and not be used. So they did find the money, got a cultural consultant, Native American person, and they created materials that were culturally appropriate. I should actually have a comparison of the two to show you the differences, but it is vastly different than what the other materials that were produced. And big mistake would have been made had they not done their research and just changed it and put in some pictures that look like them and thinking, oh, well, we'll just put pictures that look like them and we're good. And put some symbols and that's good. Had needed a total rework. So again, it actually saves you money when you do research because you're not wasting your money producing things that are not going to work. So a few more minutes. This was an interesting one. This was like probably one of the first projects that I worked on. It was about death. And it was getting people to talk about it. They talk about their own death and what they wanted when they died, and to have these ongoing, not just one-time conversations. We want to get people to be talking about this all the time. We want to get people to, and not just say, have a talk that says, what do you want when, what do you want on the last, when you're at the end of your life? What is it that you want? Oh, I want to pull the plug. That's what I want. Those are the conversations that most people have, and they think that those are a serious talk. Chances are most people aren't going to be in that situation. So they said, we want to create, so people who are in their 20s, we want everybody at every stage in their life, all through their life, having these ongoing conversations. They had created games. They were trying to get people to play at Thanksgiving. People want to play those games at Thanksgiving. So I'm like, yeah, we're not going to play those games. So they were like, well, how can we get them to actively engage in conversations by the dance plan? I said, okay, let's do some work. So we did focus groups, surveys, and online communities. We started out doing focus groups. So we wanted to find out what mattered to them. So what is it that mattered to them in their life? What makes a difference? What is worth living? So that when they're in a position where they might not be able to make decisions on their own, people know what they want. So that people know, so that their wishes can be upheld. And we did focus groups, and we had somebody in the focus group, Atul Gawande, who has done a lot of work in this area. He was one of the coalition partners, and he was watching a focus group, and they're like, oh yeah, I've read Atul Gawande's book. He wrote a great book called Being Mortal. Oh, great. Did you do anything with that? No, I haven't. I've been meaning to. So it's really difficult to change that behavior and those attitudes. So, and then we did surveys, and then from the surveys, I'm just going to quickly tell you what we did. We did what's called cluster analysis to create 5 different groups not based on demographics, but based on psychographics of behavior, to understand where they were in the process. And then we created specific messaging and strategies for people who are at different stages of this process, because some were, so, this is the one. So we did different segmentations. So we had the self-assured action takers. Those were the ones that were, those are the ones who get everything done. They, they're going on a trip, they talk 3 weeks in advance, and they have everything bought, and they were good. They were self-assured action takers. Then we had the anxious action takers. They were the ones that didn't really like to do it, didn't want to talk about it. We had the stress skeptics, like, why should I do this? We had the defiant independence and the disengaged and distraught. That was the biggest group. They were the ones who were kind of like, I can't deal with this. I don't want to deal. It's really uncomfortable. So we had to figure out all these different messaging to reach all these different people. So what they did is we then took these groups and created online communities. In an online community is where we've had I think we had like 100 people from each group. And every day we gave them an activity to do so we could kind of understand where they were coming from and what they thought. And so the first time it was like people that matter. And then we started developing materials. When we learned about them, we started developing materials. And then we started testing materials. And so we had all of these different groups. They represented different, I'm not going to go into detail because we're running out of time, but they represented different stages. But in the online communities, we realized that there were some people in the different stages of change. The theoretical model is that there was pre-contemplation. We had some people who hadn't documented it. We had to address that. Then we had to have those people who did document it in their healthcare proxy, but we wanted to get those people who had already taken action. We don't want it to stop there. You should continue to have ongoing conversations because your thoughts may change, right? Your wishes might change. So we had to take people where they were and then try to move them through that. And through the online communities, one thing was that they said, we want people to have serious talks, because we can't just say talk to people about your wishes, because then they're like, what do you want when you get close to, just pull the plug. That wasn't sufficient. It really needs to be kind of a more serious conversation. They rejected the word serious. That was scary for them. We don't want to have serious conversation. So we changed it to have a good talk. We were talking about loved ones. And that put a lot of pressure on them too, because a lot of people didn't have loved ones. They had people they cared about. So we changed it to people you care about. Have a good talk with people you care about. And so, oops, to show you. So this is some of the work that they came out with. You can't really see it. This was just something that's on their website where you can download the report, but it was like good days start with a good talk, what's best for me, soft sheets, family time, I am the conversation starter. And so the messaging was very soft in trying to get people, because at first they were trying to get people to have a serious conversation with your loved ones. And it was scary because the conversation people don't want to have. And so this was probably the most difficult campaign that I've worked on. Actually, the driving high campaign was the hardest. That was the hardest campaign. So that campaign, when Massachusetts recreational marijuana became legal in Massachusetts, the federal government said, okay, Massachusetts, you need to do a campaign raising awareness about the dangers of driving high. Great. Did some focus groups with people who were very moderate, very little marijuana usage to very high marijuana usage, and trying to find what was going to get them not to drive high. And it's the first time in my career. Usually when I'm hearing this, I think strategy and I think I know what to do. But in that instance, I left and I was working with the ad and the PR people were, because it was going to be an integrated campaign. I was like, I don't know what to tell you. It was, we asked them, like, what are some things that you wouldn't do high? They wouldn't use power tools. They wouldn't babysit children. Nobody said they wouldn't drive. So I'm like, okay, nobody said that. Then we were trying to talk to them about the dangers of driving high. And they were like, oh, there's no dangers of driving high. There's no danger of driving high. Okay. So they didn't see that. And then we said, well, what about law enforcement? You could get arrested. It's against the law. They can't tell. Okay. What about, there was this accident that happened. There was a relief of marijuana accident. They were drinking too. I mean, they were adamant about everything. So it was really difficult. So what they ended up doing, was a campaign with real people, unscripted, talking about, what happens when they drive high and why they should be driving high and the danger. So it was very authentic, very personal, and they tied it. They didn't just tie it to driving high. They tied it to driving high and drinking and driving, because we knew that was one thing that came out, was that we need to tie it to that. So then that ended up becoming the campaign for the state. So I am done talking. Thank you so much for listening. To take any questions that you might have. Yes.
So can you go through and kind of explain to the students, how did you get your skills? Like how to ask questions? Was it in school? Out of school?
It was in school. So it was in graduate school. And so I had a lot of research classes that taught me how to use those research skills, and where I was able to practice. And then I was able to get a job, and I ended up getting a job, and I fortunately worked for somebody who gave me a lot of responsibility, probably too much responsibility early on. But it gave me a good opportunity to really kind of learn as I did as well. But I had this strong research background from an academic standpoint. So I had those skills. Probably was pushed into a little too to be on my own a little too early, but it was really important. So yeah, that's a good question. Yes.
I think that thank you very much. Very interesting your discussion before. Wondering what is your sample size for this survey, and what is your selection so that your samples.
Yeah. We had I have it somewhere. Find it. 2019, but let's see, it's we did 3,000 because we did a representative sample of 2,514 adults age 18 and over. So we did a hybrid. We did online and phone because the older population was important for us to have, and we felt like it was going to be biased if we did all online, because it would be skew upper education, higher education levels. And we definitely did not want that, so we did the hybrid method, which has its advantages and disadvantages, because the way that you word your questions, you have to word them the exact same way, and sometimes the way you word questions for an online survey can be different than you do for a phone survey. So, and we did that, and we did it representative, so we made sure that the demographics reflected the national demographics.
I'm feel curious. Your research are all about how to influence others when they make decisions, and it's not a rare case when sometimes you try to do that, but the group of people you're trying to influence held rather hostile, very like aggressive, opposite opinions toward the thing you want influence them on, and sometimes that could be like rooted because there's some bigger reason like the political views like that. So how do you deal with that? How do you
That's a great question, and I'm going to reference my experience doing political polling. So when you work with candidates always want everybody to vote for them, and we always tell them, we typically segment our voters into these are the voters who will vote for you no matter what you do. They will always vote for you. That's your base. Then you have voters who will probably never vote for you. No matter what you say, they're not going to vote for you. And people, there's a tendency to try to want to win those people over, and they're hostile and they don't want to be won over and they get angry. You need to ignore those, because you have to understand that you can't persuade everybody. So then you have to go for what we call as the persuadables. Those swing in voting and polling, we call them swing voters, who you may be able to persuade. So you really need to understand the people that there's some people that you'll never be able to move over. And that's a hard lesson to learn. And when I was doing work in substance use, there were some people that we couldn't help. And we just needed to accept that. So, yeah, I should.
Did you ever encounter like survey fatigue in your studies or trouble recruiting people? And so how did you do that? I took a research course last year, and we were talking about survey fatigue.
Yeah.
On the rise.
Yeah.
With surveys in every website. And
Yeah.
so
Many surveys. So many surveys. Yeah.
How you would
yeah, because when you have a low response rate,
yeah.
you have a high response bias. And that's even, we can always find people to take our surveys, but it's who's taking our surveys to reduce that response bias. We make our surveys a lot shorter now. We also keep them very interesting by varying the questions, the type of questions that you ask, so nobody feels like they're it's getting the same agree, disagree battery of questions that you're using, and it's exhausting. So yeah, we have to sacrifice sometimes the length, because and even sometimes when people complete, you want to make sure that they're completing it honestly and taking it seriously, rather than, oh yeah, I guess got to get through this, and then they start checking anything off. So yeah, that's hard. The recruitment, we pay people for focus groups and for online communities, and that helps, but it is definitely a big challenge. And now that it's so easy to get feedback from people, or when I first started doing surveys, it was your chance of being asked to participate in a survey was less than your chance of being hit by lightning. Yeah. So yeah, that's a difficult. Yeah. So your questions have to be better. You have to have better methods of reaching out to the same people, asking them again and again to complete your survey, and they have to be shorter. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very hard for us to researchers looking. So I think it's a which has more to for the researchers in the industry who don't care about surveys to support your research, or you just focus on.
But do you care about theories?
Yes.
Sometimes, yes. I mean, so we're a little bit different in terms of doing academic research, which is based on theories and building on that, is that the connection is, and it's great, but as you can see on the Coalition for Serious Illness Care, that the theoretical model of change was really instrumental in helping us to design our campaign. And we do a lot around social norming campaigns and understanding social norming and how that influences behavior. But I do think that there should be way more alignment between academic people who are doing academic research and people who are doing practice, because we can learn so much. We can learn so much in having that theory, understanding the theory and how that's impacting decision making and persuasion.
So much professor on was a fabulous talk. You provided such an eclectic portfolio of health, politics, government, mental health, and products. You could do any template today. Which one? What would you do? How would you do it? I mean, I know it's a very hard answer to provide. Well, how would you do it? And what would it be?
It would be any campaign that would be making a difference in terms of making the world a better place. And that sounds so Pollyanna, and I don't mean it to sound Pollyanna, but that's the work that I've done that has been the most meaningful. The work that I did with people with severe mental illness, that was probably one of the most meaningful things that I've done, because I really felt like they did not have a voice. And it was an opportunity for them to have a voice. Work that I've done with low-income populations around healthcare and health insurance, and people just making the assumption that, oh, they don't have health insurance, it doesn't matter, they don't care, they can't afford it, that's why they don't have it, when it's such a more complex issue. And one of the things that we're instrumental on is that I did a lot of work in different states, the federal government before the Affordable Care Act was trying to say, how can we increase the insured rate? And so we're doing research in different states have different ideas. And what we found out was, like, people weren't willing to pay. These weren't like super low income. Super low income could get Medicaid. This was people who are low income but really didn't have any disposable income at all, none. And it was like, oh, well, we'll do a really cheap catastrophic plan. And they were kind of like, yeah, no, what am I going to do? The only coverage I get is going to be if I get like hit by a bus. And, it's like, and I'm going to give up having 3 meals a week. So, yeah, that type of work is the work that I've enjoyed and would like to keep doing. Thanks. Thank you very much.